So welcome everyone. Welcome to our fifth Zoom online session. That's how long we've been in self, or at least physical distancing. And for some of us, perhaps even quarantine, given the current events. So we're continuing to explore the 7 factors of awakening. We started with mindfulness 2 weeks ago, which is the first factor. And in last week, we kind of built on it a little more, looking at the notion of letting go or letting be, and how it kind of sets the foundation for our mindfulness practice and allows for our to see what's there. Because we're really letting go of that kind of getting tied up or entangled with what's arising, and really just letting things be as they arise. And when we do that, we can then move into to see them more clearly. So the 7 factors, just to remind you, or if this is your first session, are mindfulness, investigation, effort, happiness or joy, tranquility, concentration, and equanimity. So we will be going through all of these as we progress through these teachings. So today we're going to explore this factor called investigation. I guess I can say it's one of my favorites. Perhaps it's the way my mind is inclined. But also I think it's the emphasis that the Buddha put on it himself in his teachings. I don't know if some of you may be familiar with the questions of King Milinda. It's quite an interesting series of questions because King Milinda is a very sharp mind, and people would debate with him, and he was quite difficult, quite a hard person to debate with because of his keen mind. So he asked the question, by how many of the factors does one awaken? By how many of the factors does one awaken? And the answer was just one. It is the factor of investigation that leads to wisdom and awakening. So that's pointing to the key necessity of this factor in all our practice. So of course it's supported by all the other factors. Without mindfulness, if you're not aware what's going on and you're just being kind of thrown around by what's your experience is, or in a sense on autopilot, then it's impossible to investigate, to see the nature of what's arising. So it's supported by the other factors, but it is the key factor for wisdom and therefore for awakening. The Buddha defines investigation, and the Pali word is dhammavakaya. Dhammavakaya. As searching, investigation, scrutinizing for insight into one's own personal conditions and the external world. So you're searching, investigating, and scrutinizing for insights into what's happening internally and externally. So we're really looking into what's arising. I hope you got a taste of that from the meditation. In the meditation, I introduced the notion of noting, where you note with a light touch what's arising in your experience, thinking, planning, worrying, perhaps a particular story that's arising again and again, or breathing in, breathing out. Just putting that light touch of a note. It's called noting, but this, I guess, a label is another word on the experience. And it allows you to contact it and then stay with it a little bit, and perhaps slow down the rate at which new objects arise into your awareness, and therefore gives you a chance to look at it and understand it, to deeply see it. It's this search for the truth. The truth. That's what we're searching for in this practice. As Krishnamurti said, it is the truth that liberates, not your efforts to be free. It is the truth that liberates, not your efforts to be free. That one sentence is loaded with with content at so many levels, but it's this notion of investigation to uncover, discover, unravel the truth. It's this deep seeing, vipassana, deeply seeing, that we're present with. So we're not trying to come to some intellectual conclusion in investigation. That word might conjure up a notion of analysis and a cognitive kind of intellectual exploration, but it's not that. It's more like a curiosity to see particular aspects and elements of your experience, of your direct experience. As Joseph Goldstein says, it's discovering what's what. Discovering what's what. So seeing the whole picture. What's what? Sayadaw Tanjaniya, who I often speak about, a Burmese practitioner and monk, said, "Wisdom never believes, wisdom investigates." And this is another important aspect of this practice, is the Buddha never asked us to believe anything on blind faith. It was always about investigating and seeing for yourself based on your direct experience. Cutting through ignorance. On my over my shoulder here, I have a statue, Manjushri, if you can see that. I have a bit of a relationship with Manjushri. It keeps coming up in my practice. And Manjushri is holding a flaming sword in one hand that is symbolizing cutting through delusion, ignorance, duality. So it's got that notion of cutting through to see the truth. and the Prajna Paramita Sutta in the other hand, the wisdom teachings. I say Manjushri keeps coming up in my practice. I went to a retreat, my first Tibetan retreat, and it happened to be a retreat, a 10-day retreat on Manjushri. And then one of my teachers, more recent teachers, Ajashanti, has the only thing he has on his table is is one of these icons of Manjushri, symbolizing the wisdom teachings. So we're bringing this curiosity to what arises moment by moment. And that's on the cushion and off the cushion. So what we just did in the guided meditation was, just looking at all the aspects of our experience, thoughts arising on the cushion. But you also bring the same kind of curiosity to your experience off the cushion. So mindfulness isn't enough. Awareness isn't enough. I think that's why I think this is one of my favorite teachings, because we hear so much about mindfulness. Mindfulness is everywhere. But really, mindfulness is paying attention to the present moment on purpose. It's got non-judgmentally, so there's an element of blaming yourself for what's arising. But really, it's the investigation of all that brings wisdom. So we really should be hearing just as much or more about this factor of curiosity and investigation. Mindfulness is not enough for the arising of wisdom. It's a foundation, but not enough. We must look and see and discover. See the truth. We kind of go through a process with this too, with the way we relate to the teachings. We hear the teachings, right? So you're using the cognitive mind right now, right? Because you're hearing these teachings and you're kind of going, yeah, okay, that makes sense, or that doesn't make sense. Perhaps questions arising. So the cognitive mind is reflecting on what I'm saying, and you're getting kind of a basis for what this means and how this might be part of your practice. So it's that's kind of the first stage I look at is, you're to use this tool, the mind, that can analyze and figure things out. So you do that. That's kind of the first phase. But then you take this and you apply it to your direct experience. That's really the investigation for wisdom. You look and see what's true in your direct experience. Then, of course, insights and knowing, understanding arise based on that. And then, of course, you move. That's the third stage is you move to then integrate those insights and understandings into your daily life. So I could say insights are not enough in many ways if they're not integrated into your life and shift the way you behave and the way you see reality. Then you might find you're having the same insight over and over again. And I've had this experience in my practice where I have the same insight. And I think that's enough. I've had the insight, and then I just kind of let it go. And then I didn't integrate it into my life. So then it had to be sort of understood or re-known in order to then be applied and integrated. So there's those three kind of phasing, understanding intellectually, seeing if it's true in your direct experience, which is insight, and then integrating that into your everyday life. So what do I mean when I say bring curiosity to what's arising moment by moment? Like, how do you actually do that? Right? So you're mindful, you see what's arising moment by moment. What's it look like concretely? I try to bring that concrete aspect into the teachings that I offer you so that they can be applied. How many people have done an MBSR course or some kind of mindfulness-based course where you do what's called inquiry? So some of us have. So inquiry, where the teacher says, so what came up for you during that meditation we just did? Right? Or words to that effect. What came up for you in that meditation that we just did? And then the student describes something that came up. Then the instructor would ask another question. And all they're doing is bringing curiosity to it. How did that feel? Were there any thoughts associated with that? Did it change or shift in any way? So there, you can see how they're sort of guiding you through a process of investigating your experience. And they're really looking at, as we did in the guided meditation, dukkha, anicca, and anatta, how suffering arises or not, the impermanent or ever-changing nature of what arises, and the selfless nature of whatever arises. So it tends to be how we, as a kind of baseline frame, you can look at how you bring curiosity to your experience, to what's arising. So this inquiry process that we do in these mindfulness-based interventions, we can bring the same kind of inquiry process to our practice. Noticing how you perhaps create suffering without any judgment or blame. It's just that noticing. Okay, this happened. Then a feeling tone arose based on the experience, and then a thought train a story fed into it, and it got bigger. And then I felt contraction in the body. This is what suffering and the creation of suffering looks like. And then the next time, the same type or the same exact experience may occur. You may go, oh, there it is. Oh, here comes that thought train again. I know what this looks like. This is what the cessation of suffering looks like, because I've just seen it. I've seen it. As soon as you see it, you're not caught up in it anymore. You're just seeing it as opposed to believing it and being caught up in it. As soon as you see it, oh, that's what this. Now you can see, bring curiosity to the cessation of suffering and dwell in that. And it's the same with impermanence. You can notice impermanence at the very gross level. In fact, most people would agree that things change at that gross level. You notice your body changing, your car changes, everything kind of shifts. We're really also bringing this down to a very subtle, it's not just that things change, but every moment is different than the previous moment. Nothing is static in any moment. And then, of course, seeing how there's really no me, there's no self in control of any of this. I always like to say, if you were in control of your thoughts, you'd be able to tell me the next thought you were going to have, or you'd be able to just stop them like that. Right? How many times have you been lying in bed and you'd like to go to sleep and the mind's just going woo, woo, churning away thoughts? And of course, if you were in control of that whole process, you would just switch it off. So it's noticing that, how this is nature unfolding. There's no you that's in control of it. And that's very freeing. You're kind of giving nature back to itself, and allowing it to unfold. Giving nature back to itself. So that's kind of the concrete way that we can do investigation. Now, what comes of it? This word insight, of course, we call this insight meditation, which would point to the notion of insights arising in this practice. And my experience is insights come about in two ways. They can come about primarily two ways. They can come about while you're doing the practice. So while you're sitting on the cushion or while you're doing a walking meditation, you're exploring what's arising. Suddenly you go, oh, wow, that's very clear. Often the mind is settled and there's an element of calmness in the mind, settledness in the mind. So it's receptive to seeing deeply. And there's just this sense of, oh, wow, yeah, that is so true. I'm going to give you a couple of examples from my personal experience, not to kind of come off as somebody that's had tons of insights, but just to give, because there's lots more that that I'm sure are there to be had in my experience, but just to give you a flavor for how they may come about. So doing walking meditation on a retreat, I think it was fairly far into the retreat. The mind was fairly settled and we were asked to, do the back and forth in a lane where you do, very slow walking and bring awareness to the walking. And I was, going slowly, foot, noticing the foot rising, the foot falling. Came to the end of the track. So my feet stopped moving because I had kind of an imaginary line there. And then what bubbled up was body turning to the right. And I thought, why the right? Where did that come from? So I just stood there. And the thought bubbled up, okay, the left. I thought, well, where did that come from? Who just changed their mind? And then I literally stood there. I don't know how long, but I just kept watching these thought bubbles come up about the simple act of turning and walking in the other direction. And it struck me at a very deep level to my core that I was not in control of what was arising in the mind. So it was a very deep seeing. I knew it in my bones. It wasn't an intellectual knowing. It was very much a seeing from my direct experience that these thoughts were just arising selflessly. So that's an example of a insight arising during a practice, flowing from investigation and curiosity. Another way that I've found they arise is you might be practicing and practicing, and then they just spontaneously come out days later. That's why I always say your practice may feel like it's going nowhere, nothing's happening. Don't believe that thought. Something's always happening when you're practicing. So I was practicing again at a retreat on impermanence and really looking at, bringing curiosity to the subtle movements of experience and the subtle movements of body sensations, and really feeling into very subtle sensations in the body and how they're different in each moment. There was no constant. It was a constant flux, constant flow of sensation. And I did this for days. And, nothing really struck me as deeply seeing. And then, and I may have told this, some of you may have heard this part of the story before. I was taking the dog out for a walk, and I was reaching down to pick up I had my hand in the poo bag, and I was reaching down to pick up Rocky's business. And all of a sudden it hit me, just this sudden spontaneous knowing that everything's impermanent. And it shook me. I ran home and said to Vida, my wife, I just realized that everything's impermanent and it's changed. Of course, as soon as you share an insight with somebody, they don't get it because it sounds like something you could have read in a book and you're just telling them. But it's not something, it didn't come from a place of reading it in a book. It came from a deep knowing in it. So it came after the process of doing that exploration. And I've heard other students speak about this notion of insights coming also after retreats, sometimes days, weeks, or even months later. So those are the two ways they come on and off the cushion during practice or after practice. So in other words, anytime. And it's this continuity of practice, this continuity of mindfulness, and then continuity of bringing curiosity to what arises within awareness that allows this deep seeing to reveal itself. Here's a quote from Ajahn Chah. Ajahn Chah is the Thai forest meditation master, who was a teacher of many of our Western teachers. Ajahn Sumedho, for example, Ajahn Viradhamma, who's a local monk out in Perth. Very pithy quotes that he has, very direct statements. So Ajahn Chah, whatever we do, we should see ourselves. Reading books doesn't ever give rise to anything. The days pass by, but we don't see ourselves. Knowing about practice is practicing in order to know. I like that last. Knowing about practice is practicing in order to know. So a book can be helpful because it gives you knowing about how to practice, but it's the practice where the knowing comes from. It's the practice where the knowing comes from. So if you want to know truth, practice meditation, investigation with wise effort. And the books just give you, I've just given you enough knowing in terms of investigation and mindfulness in the last 3 sessions that you could practice for the next year. You could stop coming to this group and just practice you have enough there to really, um, enough knowing about practice that you can now practice in order to know. I used to read a lot of books. I still do, I guess, but not near what I used to read. I gave away hundreds of Dharma books. I was just like a sponge. If somebody told me about a new book about the Dharma, about meditation, mindfulness, I had to read it. And finally, a teacher said, "Oh, it's part of your personality, what's arisen in terms of causes and conditions and genetics. So it's not a problem, but I invite you to explore. For every hour that you read, you practice for an hour." That was an interesting invitation. That was going to be a lot of practice. So it really struck me as, you know, bringing that element. Now I would say, practice much, much more than you read. That was actually a gentle invitation on his part. So knowing about practices is practicing in order to know. I'll just say a bit more before I wrap up and leave some time for questions. Another way, a sort of a metaphor for insight, is being in a dark room and turning on a flashlight. That metaphor helps. It's that kind of instant seeing, the seeing clearly, without needing to think about it. I mean, the mind will jump in. When an insight arises, the mind will try to do something with it. But it's really seeing clearly without thinking about it, looking directly. So it's this non-intellectual, non-cognitive realization of the truth, of the true nature of the mind and the body. What I'm going to finish up with is the notion of, well, I'll read a quote first from Dogen, the Zen, Japanese Zen teacher. Cease practice based on intellectual understanding, pursuing words and following after speech. Learn the backward step that turns your light inward to illuminate within. Body and mind of themselves will drop away, and your original face will be manifest. Turn the light inward to illuminate within. Body and mind of themselves will drop away, and your original face will be manifest. Original face is referring to the selfless emptiness, truth of our being. It's that Zen koan. If you've ever heard of Zen koans, it's these little statements that a teacher will give a Zen student to sit with. And one is, show me your original face, the face you had before your parents were born. And the student is asked to go off and meditate on that. And they come back and they usually have some complex description of what their face might have been before their parents were born, and they're usually trapped in time and so on, in the notion of time and space. And the idea is to cut through all the words and get this kind of intuitive, direct understanding of the self. And usually it's meant to bring us to our wits' end of using words and concepts. So you'll go into the teacher and explain it all using words and concepts, and they'll go, no, not it. Go back again, meditate some more on your original face before your parents were born. And you'll come back with more words and concepts. No, that's not it. Go practice. And then basically you run out of words and concepts and just come to some basic intuitive, direct understanding. So Zen koans are very much inviting this investigation in a very unique way. So that's another thing you can play around with if that interests you, is Zen koans. So we're seeing what is present, exactly what is present. Everything's illuminated. And in particular, the three characteristics of impermanence, unsatisfactoriness, and selflessness. Of course, you can also bring this direct investigation into other of the other lists of, the five aggregates of grasping, the Four Noble Truths, how suffering is caused, or dependent origination. You can bring investigation into your direct experience to see how those teachings are true as well. So I'll just leave it at that and open it up for any questions. Oh, I got to unmute you just a second. Yeah, it's hard to ask a question if you're muted.
So you
There we
mentioned.
go. Okay, I unmuted, so please, you can start now.
Can you hear me?
Who is that?
Anita? Can you hear?
Okay, Anita, yeah.
Yeah. So when you talked about reading and sort of intellectual part of it, I find that though I don't read a lot, I do sometimes write things down to help myself grasp what I'm hearing. So it seems to be, that's certainly not the root of it, but especially early on when these things are new, and I find I'm really trying to get my head around what it is, or like, I don't know, just some degree of reading and reflecting. It helps as a foundation to then take me forward and then do practice about it. So there seems to be, from my experience so far, there seems to be a bit of a balance there, not none of one and all of the other. I'd be interested to hear your insights from your experience on that.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, that sounds wonderful. It's just, knowing how to practice in order to practice in order to know. So you learn, you kind of get that intellectual knowing about and reflecting, because if you're writing down things down, and so you're bringing curiosity, and then oh, this is what I noticed, and this is how I noticed it, and it's a process. But then there's also the recognition that the fruits of the practice arise out of practice. Yeah, as you said. Yeah.
Got to start somewhere.
Yeah.
Thank you.
I really appreciate you saying or talking about the insights that come whenever they come. I never get, seldom have I got an insight while sitting, but they come just out of the blue. Like you say, you might be picking up your dog's business or something, and suddenly a thing, I love it. It strikes me, and it's a body thing, and that's when I know it's real. So I'm very grateful for you that you brought attention to that. So thank you.
Stephen, I have a question which is probably related to a question I've often asked or struggled with, which is related to the question of who's doing the observing of the mind. So I've just been reflecting on an aspect of this, I think, while you've been talking. So we're looking in our meditation and investigating, we're looking for the truth. And there's sort of a knowing of the truth. And I'm just wondering, in different threads of Buddhism, is there sort of an idea of where that knowing is located? I mean, you were talking about not looking at it from a cognitive point of view, an intellectual point of view. When I just settle in, it does feel like there is just this knowing of some insight, some truth. But I'm wondering, in different threads of Buddhism, are there explanations of where that is? Like part of, the knowing is part of, sort of universal consciousness or the divine, or some other explanations, or is it just seen as a mystery?
Yeah, so there would be some differences between traditions on how consciousness with a big C, the absolute, the ultimate, is understood. But it doesn't mean that there isn't some congruence between them as well. So you might talk about in Tibetan Buddhism, a Buddha nature knowing, and the notion of an ultimate self or Buddha nature. Whereas you wouldn't get that in Zen. Zen, they're just trying to clear the decks, right? They're just getting you completely out of a sense of self that's there to know anything. Self that's, you're just trying to get beyond all concepts of what truth is. So they're trying to get you to drop any conceptions of what you might think truth is. To go beyond the mind, because the mind cannot understand itself, the true nature of itself. So you really have to go beyond mind in that sense. So yeah, there'd be subtle differences, but we are letting go of the sense that there's a self that's going to get this. I mean, you can really start to look at that in your practice. If there's a self that's leaning into a desire to get to the truth, then notice if there is actually a self, like look for it. I mean, that might be a good time to practice with the aggregates, the khandhas, and just see if they're, what is this leaning, and is there suffering in this leaning? That's actually something we explored. I'm doing an online retreat with Insight Meditation Society. They had a retreat scheduled this week, and they couldn't obviously offer it with what's going on, so they turned it into an online retreat. So it's been going on all week, and there was something that Greg Scarf spoke about in terms of, look for that leaning of a self that's leaning for something, a particular type of meditation, leaning, this subtle desire for the truth, that self that tries to wiggle its way into our practice. But I don't have a problem, different traditions, Buddha nature. I'll rest in Buddha nature, which is just spacious awareness. Or I'm fine with, and if you read One Dharma, I've brought this book up before. Joseph Goldstein goes directly into that question of some of the different ways that the different traditions come at this practice. So that might be another. I'm recommending a book in a session that tells you, this all comes from. But again, I don't discount books, right? I just read too many books relative to the amount I practiced. So I didn't have the balance that Anita was talking about. I was like this, way more on the book side. So not that's, I've let go of that, but I was in that place for many years.
I thought it was interesting the way you sort of highlighted the fact that insight on its own or mindfulness on its own is not enough. It's probably the first time I've ever heard it said like that. It just seems so obvious and true, and yet I never really thought of it. So why is it that we hear so much about just the mindfulness part and not the rest of it? Obviously mindfulness is foundational to the rest of it. I'm just curious. So I don't know, what is your take on that?
All kinds of thoughts about how this practice is in some ways has been co-opted or brought into so many different realms in ways that aren't true to its roots came to mind, but I don't know that would be a helpful answer. So they tend to just you'll be more focused if you're mindful, and you'll therefore be more productive, or they've kind of taken these aspects of not being scattered, a scattered brain, or being kind of, and that then made that the focus in so many places. But there's also so many places where this has been brought into mainstream in some very effective and useful ways, like mindfulness-based stress reduction, and similar interventions. So MBSR inquiry is the key part of the program. I mean, it could be called mindfulness and inquiry-based stress reduction. It doesn't kind of fall off the tongue, I guess. Because inquiry, I would say you're basically practicing and then doing inquiry every single time. So it is there, but you're right. If you asked, 5 minutes, just talking to people, and I bring up mindfulness, they don't tend to bring in the element of investigation for the truth as much. So, and the why, it could just be the way that it's been co-opted in certain fields where it hasn't been true to its roots. I mean, when John Kabat-Zinn brought out mindfulness-based stress reduction, he saw how beneficial this was to people, but he thought, is this the right thing to do? Like, I'm basically stripping, I'm mainstreaming it, what is essentially the Buddhist teachings. So he actually went to the Dalai Lama and said, this is what I'm planning on doing. I'm going to I want to offer this teaching in this format. And the Dalai Lama said, well, if you're alleviating people's suffering, throw out the Buddha. So it was on that, that sounds much like the Dalai Lama would put it, if it's because that's what the teachings are about, is alleviating suffering. Then if throwing out the Buddha helps that happen, then but mention that it's based on the teachings of the Buddha to be true to it. So if you're ever teaching MBSR, you mention in the first lesson that this is based on the teachings of the Buddha, but then you never mention the Buddha again. But it's very true to the teachings. Other interventions, I may not be, and then they wouldn't have this element of investigation. It may just be the superficial kind of, focusing attention. That's it.